Hey guys, welcome to another Hog 4 webinar. We have Noah here today with us. He's going to
Hello.
be joining back on with all of these. Noah, you want to say anything before we jump into what today's stuff is?
No. Glad to be back on the webinars.
Yeah, yeah, glad to have you back also.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, cool. So today we're going to talk about OSC tips, tricks, all that good stuff. Kind of like an overview of what OSC actually is and how you can actually use it in your show file a bit. Um, just to let you know what's coming up next is next week we're going to do 10 tips and tools to be a better hog programmer. Noah is probably going to lead us on that one though. Figured y'all probably had enough of me talking for quite a bit of webinars, so Noah's going to come up with some 10 tips and tools and share that with y'all. So with that being said, let's hop into hog real quick. Um, so just to show you let's talk also about OSC, and kind of what it is, especially if you haven't used it before. It's a really great tool, I think, in anyone's tool belt, in any programmer's tool belt, especially if you're setting something up remotely. So what is OSC? OSC is a protocol that's used to communicate between devices. And what's cool about OSC is that it's supported by a lot of different devices, and it's manufacturer agnostic. So OSC stands for Open Sound Control. It's an open protocol that basically dictates how a network packet needs to be sent, and can be received by another device. Like I said, it's used between different manufacturers. So this allows for, like, if you had like a hog in an EOS setup, you could actually trigger both of those consoles at the same time via OSC by sending out different OSC messages from like a QLab if you wanted to. That way you don't have to have two different board ops. You can just have the one board op on QLab hitting the button and it triggers both the consoles at the different times. So that, which is kind of nifty for to be able to get to different manufacturing devices, and also because OSC is not a lighting specific protocol, it can be used by soundboards, video switchers. Basically, there's a lot of different items and different like I keep saying, different devices that OSC can be either used to send triggers out of, receive triggers, that kind of thing. It allows you to be able to communicate with basically any device on a network if you're talking specifically with hog. So with that said, OSC is usually sent over the network. So if you're running it wirelessly, you're connected to a Wi-Fi, to a wireless network, or it can also be hardwired through Ethernet cable or Cat6, Cat5 cable. There are some devices that also support it going over USB. So some people might be familiar with the ETC Light Hack boxes that you can kind of make with those Arduinos, and kind of make your own like little hardware setup with those. Hog, as far as I'm aware, doesn't really support that because that goes over USB into the console. But if you were able to get that into a network setting, you could then use it to control hog and stuff like that. OSC, like I said, it can also run on a local network if you want. So if you had Hog4 PC running on a computer and you want to run another software on that same computer, you can do that and communicate via OSC at the same time. So it doesn't have to be on two separate machines. It can even be on the same machine. Let's talk about let's talk about a bit of how OSC and Hog can be used together. So if you send OSC into Hog, this is really where Hog shines, is coming into Hog itself. So what'll happen is you can, where's my mouse? There it is. You have specific commands to control the buttons on the hog. So each hardware on the front panel has buttons itself that you can push on there, which is really nifty. So you can say how far up the fader goes, bring it down. You can say, great, I'm going to spin the encoder wheel just a little bit. That kind of thing. You can also then control cue lists, scenes, and macros directly. So inside your scene directory, one second, guys. Inside your scene directory here, you can double tap scene. You could actually trigger if there were any scenes in here itself. or inside your list directory, you could go ahead and directly trigger lists, and then same thing for macros. You can directly trigger macros, and you can directly trigger certain steps or certain queues inside a queue list. So if you had a giant queue list, like list 10 had 10 queues, you could specifically say, go list 10, queue 5.5 if you needed to. It just makes it so that you can set up a show control basically to go to that specific queue, and that's just useful if you need to hand off an iPad to someone and they just need to be able to trigger that one queue at a right time. Sorry guys, trying to get back to my notes here. Yeah.
So yeah, OSC is great just because you can customize it like crazy, and it's also really awesome when you can hand an iPad or a phone or some sort of a tablet device to a client who doesn't necessarily need to know how to program a console, or a volunteer or anybody of that nature, and basically say, here's your limitations, right? And so they can't screw it up. You kind of create some redundancy by giving them an interface that's not as complicated as, say, a lighting console.
Yeah. Exactly. And you can lock it down and only show them what they want or what they need at that point. You can open it up and kind of make a whole you can have it to where you can control every part of the console in that case if you wanted to as well. So yeah, you can simulate encoder wheels, button pushes, control lists, scenes, and then if you're on a full bore 4 or hog 4, you have you can also then take into account the trackball movement on the console as well. Which is kind of nifty. Now, Hog does send some OSC commands out. Now, you can't customize OSC out to be able to send it to whatever you want, but it is useful. There are some useful things that it does send out, like the LED states on the front panel. So, like how the pause button right now is lit up in red, or the choose key is lit up in blue. You can get that out of the console and do something based on that if you needed to. We also send out encoder wheel labels and values, and then LED state, and then command line as well. So where it says group 105 list right now, we could actually get that into a app if we needed to, or triggers that, or into QLab to trigger something else if we absolutely needed to, stuff like that. And that's really like how OSC gets in. I mean, what OSC can take in, and what Hog can take in and spit out. Let's talk about how we actually set up OSC real quick in the Hog. So to set up OSC, what we're going to do here is we're going to close these windows. So whenever you're going to go set up OSC and get the console ready to send OSC in and send it out, we go into the network window. So I'm going to click here, network. And inside the network, we're going to go to the console. So it's done on a per console basis. So you click on console and then you go to settings, and then you go to the open sound control tab. So with the open sound control tab, you have your input port and then your output port, and you want to make sure you check the OSC in and you check the OSC out. So basically the port numbers are kind of directing where in this IP address scheme are we actually going to send the message. So whether we're sending it out or we're receiving it, this is kind of how where the console is going to send it or listen for the messages coming in or out. And depending on the app that you're using or the device that you're using, you might need, on the input side of it, you might need to swap, which we're going to walk through a couple of these apps here. But so we have our port numbers. You always want these to be unique numbers. So like the defaults are 7001 and 7002. So I usually just keep those the same. And then your IP address here is going to be the IP address of the device that you're going to talk to. So whether that's an iPad, if that's a computer on the network, that kind of thing. So that's what's going to be happening here. And this grayed out IP address is the HogNet IP. So all open sound control is done via the HogNet network. So just be aware, if you're on a base model Hedgehog 4, you can't use open sound control. But any other console and Hog 4 PC should be able to use open sound control. And with that being said, currently with 3.13.0 and below and older, so from whenever OSC was introduced to 3.13.1, you need some kind of Hog hardware to unlock to unlock OSC. So whether that's a ETC Nomad key, the 12 universe dongle, a Hoglet, a Nano Hog, some kind of Hog4 hardware is needed to unlock fully OSC. And what I mean by that is that will be used to unlock all of the hardware. If you don't have that plugged in, you can still control your buttons and the cue list scenes, macros, that kind of stuff, but you won't get control over the encoder wheels or the faders. If that makes sense. And I say only until 3.13.1 because in the next software release in 3.14, Hog4 PC will unlock OSC fully. So that's a little yay and look forward to the next release.
Just a quick note. Peter asks, is it a one-to-one relationship between two devices, or could more than two devices be involved? So I did try to do this a few months ago. You can have more than one input, but you can't have more than one output from the console, if I remember correctly. It's one or the other, but I'm 95% sure that you can have multiple OSC devices going into the console. You just have to broadcast it in, but you can't have more than one output. Is that right, Megan? I'm pretty sure that was the case.
There is a slight workaround to that. I haven't done it myself. I just know it exists because I talked to Mark Lorenz about this. Overall, generally, like what Noah said is completely true if you don't want to deal with any like network foolery. But what you could do, what Mark told me that he does is he sets your output IP address to the router's IP address, I believe. Because then it's talking to the router, and then your input port on your device would be that port number and then the router IP address. So it's still picking up from there. I believe I think is what it's done. Yeah, so you can send commands from multiple devices to Hog itself, but it will not send out to multiple. It won't send out OSC to multiple devices, if that makes sense. So if you had EOS, Hog, and an app, maybe the app is what needs to get the OSC out. So like on an iPad, for example, OSC out comes to the iPad. EOS, QLab, and the iPad all need to talk to Hog. That's totally fine and super easy to set up with exactly what I was saying. All EOS app, QLab would all be pointed to this IP address, the 192, whatever your RAID-out IP address is in that port number, this input port, and it will be able to read it in. And then your output IP address, I'm pointing on my screen like y'all can see what I'm pointing at on my screen. And my output IP address is going to be the device that needs to read in the command line and the encoder wheels and stuff like that.
And you don't always have an input and an output. Mm-hmm. You don't have to have both.
Yeah, you can disable one. You can disable the other if you need to. So like at this point, if I were to OK this, it would just take information in. It wouldn't send any OSC out. I'm going to keep them both checked though for now. Cool. Any other questions before we keep going here?
Doesn't look like it.
Great. Because I'm going to kind of transition into talking more about like some apps that are kind of used to control Hog. I currently have an iPad. That is the only. I don't live in the Android sphere at all, but I did look up a couple apps that work with Android. But what I'm going to show is iOS centered. But the first one I'm going to show will actually work with both iOS and Android. And that is going to be Touch OSC. So you should be able to see my iPad in the bottom right corner right now. And the first thing I'm going to go do is actually connect OSC. So right now it's disabled. I'm going to go ahead and enable it. So when you launch Touch OSC, it is going to probably launch in a layout that's not Hog. I think it goes to like this. Which is not very useful to us. So the first thing we probably actually want to do is download some layouts from Touch OSC. We have some layouts on our website, highend.com. Go to Hog4, and then you'll be able to find in third-party tools, find the Touch OSC layouts. They say they're specifically for iPad and iPhone. They do work on Android. It's just that the device screen was made for the iPad. And Noah's putting nifty links in the chat.
Yep, I just linked it.
Yeah. But then once you have that loaded, you can change your layout here to the HOG4 layout, and then you'll start seeing it looks very similar to your playback and your programming side. You also get some playback control, like I was talking about, to directly go to cues, playlists, scenes, macros, that kind of deal. But first, let's get this all configured here with Touch OSC. So I'm going to tap on the connections, make sure it's enabled. Your host in Touch OSC is going to be the console's IP address. That's that great IP address I was talking about. So that 192.168.86.45. Then your port, which is your outgoing port, that's when I was talking about how we switch here. So your outgoing port on Touch OSC is the input port on the console. So that's going to be 7001. Output port is 7002. And then this grayed out local IP address, that's the iPad's IP address. You got to make sure that is the IP address put inside your console here. So that's what this field is for. And then once it's enabled, it's done here. I'm going to hit OK. Now, if I go into done here, we can go and bring up and down fader 2, and we should be able to see the lights come on and make them go off. Trying to go a little bit slower because I know sometimes the visualizer doesn't like to play nice with the WebEx. So that's just fader control program. We can then go into programming. I'm going to come here, pig release. Programming, I can just 1 through 9 at full. If you see, the command line is not actually feeding in right now. This is the wonderful thing about 7002. I don't think I put the right IP address there. No, I did. 86.41. But so the command line should all come through. And programming, let's clear again. Let's try again. 1 through 9. It's not. I don't know why it's not sending through, but it's not now. It might be that it's just getting blocked on the network for some reason, since this is a work laptop. But you should be getting. I wonder if it's that or another app open. That's intersecting the. I bet I have another. Something else is intercepting the command line stuff. I bet is what's going on.
Yeah.
But you should get the command line, encoder wheel labels, all that good stuff's put through. We can program with pan and tilt. And everything in here is what we send out. So these little like black circles we send out, that's the LED state. We'll send out command button labels, all that good stuff here as well. Like I said, you can also control the trackball. That's what this is. This little XY thing is the trackball. So you could actually control the trackball if you needed to here as well via this Touch OSC. Touch OSC is, I really like Touch OSC mainly because you can go and you can customize exactly what's going to happen with it. So what that means is maybe you don't like the layouts that are being you don't like the layouts that are there? Well, great. You can then go on your computer, launch the Touch OSC editor itself, and you can go and adjust actually where faders are. Maybe in your programming section on that page, you don't need actually the trackball control. So you can click on it and then hit delete, and it's going to go away. I say that as it doesn't delete. There we go. Delete, and it's going to go away. So you can actually start customizing these pretty nicely as well, or underneath playback control. If you don't need the macro control, you can actually go ahead and delete all of those as well. You can go and copy and paste and make these work exactly how you want to. So Touch OSC is really flexible. It gives you that ability to make that layout, like Noah was talking about, how if you don't need to send out to give them full control of the console, they just need a go button on list 1. Well, great, here you go. You can make that happen, and you don't even need to put in all these pages up here. You only need to show what you have at this point. And that's really Touch OSC. I mean, that's the real big strength of Touch OSC is that customizability that you get there. I'm going to undo what I did because I like my layouts to stay pretty default. But where Touch OSC gets a little bit of flack is the fact that it doesn't look like Hog necessarily. So I'm going to switch to another app, actually, that really does look like Hog. It's the Hog for Remote app. I'm going to here, and we're going to I'm going to disable OSC from Touch OSC itself. Done. And we're going to go away. Thank you. Hog for Remote. So again, this is another OSC app. This is made by a company called Numio in conjunction with Preworks. What's really nice about the Hog for Remote app itself is that it's very familiar to all the Hog users. It's going to look like your console, as you can already see from just the configuration window, basically. So we're going to go back. I think I have those all set up correctly, but let's just go make sure before we start poking at it. Settings. Open sound control. This is one where the settings must be entered backwards, so we can see it tells you the input-output settings must be entered twisted to the console, meaning the output port goes to the input port goes to the output port. So we have our input, 7002, right? 7001, cool, 4141, great. We have everything set here. They have this nano mode option in here, and what that nano mode option allows us to do is dynamically change whether or not we have 4 encoder wheels on the desk or 5 encoder wheels on the desk, just like if you were in front of a Roadhog instead of a full bore. You get that choice between 4 and 5 encoder wheels. And then no sleep just allows you to say, great, the iPad just needs to stay on, and then whether or not you actually want to apply the settings. It's kind of nifty. Also, it has these RX and TX buttons up at the top. I don't know if they can be seen very well, but they light up in blue. So when things are being received, you can actually see them. You can actually see that RX like light up a little bit. But like I said, the nice thing is it looks like your console already. So I'm going to hit here, clear out. We can go back here. If I hit go, oh, this was probably the app that had the OSC stuff stuck in it. Because we can see here we have that pause and we get that LED state, that red button state, which is really nice. Same thing for programming. We have the command line here. You can see what pan and tilt are. All that good stuff. We can actually see the tilt values, the pan values. They also have this really nifty feature that I really like in here, and it's called Pig Trigger. Well, I like it to an extent. This is not my favorite app, but it is a good app. Pig Trigger, where it's an in-app purchase unlock, and it allows you to designate what scenes and what lists you want to push. So again, really good if you just want to hand an iPad off to someone. Say, hey, you just have to hit the scene, hit this button that triggers the scene 1, for example, and that'll just always make you go blue. Well, they take it a step further in the fact that you can also assign a picture to it. So if you can take a picture on the iPad of what the look looks like, upload it to that scene basically and assign it there, and then you can go the scene, and then you can just hand it off to the volunteer and say, just tap the one that looks like what you want it to look like.
Pick what you want.
Exactly. So if you want it blue, you hit the one that's blue. You want it red, you hit the one that's red, and so on. So that's really nice in that respect. Like I haven't purchased the in-app purchase because I'll just make the Touch OSC things. Touch OSC doesn't support the image, but it does let me label and all that kind of stuff. And the last one on iOS that is very hog-centered, at least, is the iHog app. And I will be honest, I am very biased on that app. That is one that I've made myself.
I wonder why.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm biased. It solves the issue of the fact that you can't control groups from either of the Touch OSC or the Hog 4 Remote app. I'm going to choose the app. Choose the show OSC, turn on. Again, these are just the same settings. it does something slightly different where the console input port number and the output port number, you don't actually have to switch those numbers. It is, in my mind, I was trying to make it self-explanatory in that respect. But we can go back over here, clear out, and it's going to control just like everything else did. We have your command line, your pan tilt, all that kind of stuff. LEDs come in, turn on highlight if you need to. And then, like I said, what I like about it, and really what I wanted that I couldn't get out of any other app, is the fact to select groups with just the button push like we're used to, just like if it was a console screen. Unos, washes. You can go in here. I would say it probably looks the most different out of all the apps, so it just depends on your familiarity, all that kind of stuff. So then we could and select them and program with them just like you're used to on a console. Again, that's the whole point of a lot of these iPad apps, is they work like the console works for the most part. Any question about those iOS apps? I don't think anything came in, but
nope.
We can. Cool. Great. Yeah, so the iOS apps, now a little bit about the Android. Like I said, Android has Touch OSC also, so whatever you make on Touch OSC editor can also go to your Android device, which is kind of nifty. That way, if you have people on the crew that use both Android and iOS, you can, yep, me and Noah, actually, Noah uses Android all the time, a lot more than I do at least.
Yeah.
100% more than I do, actually. You can share templates back and forth. So if I make something for my iPhone, I can just share it to him and be like, hey, look, this is something nifty that I did. It's not specific to a certain platform. And then there was another one that I found that there's not one specific for Hog that I could find. There's one called OSC Controller that I found while Googling a little bit. It looked the most up to date, and it looks like you just added the functions that you needed. Noah, did you get a chance to play with it a little bit?
I have not, but
Okay.
I will install it now and take a look at it.
We'll get live feedback. Yeah, but
It looks like your standard OSC app.
There you go. Some buttons, some faders, some encoder wheels.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, these apps, when it comes to the phones and the iPads, they all look pretty much the same. They get a little bit different on the design, but they all control faders, they all control buttons, they all control encoders, that kind of stuff. I think where OSC gets more fun and more useful is once you start bringing it over to the desktop, so to say, to where, like, if you needed a central show control computer, well, that's when OSC is going to get a little bit more in-depth and a little bit more controllable. So let's do that, I guess, at this point. Well, we're going to switch over to where you can see the laptop at the same time. I'm going to go ahead and close out Touch OSC Editor. The first app that I really wanted to talk about was the OSC Widgets app. I'm going to actually just focus on the computer real quick. And this OSC Widgets app is made by ETC Labs, so it's their GitHub open source project. It doesn't look the prettiest on my super high-res MacBook screen, but it does work really well. So what's nifty about this app is you can go and you say what IP address you're in, what your output port, all that kind of stuff is, but then you get to kind of customize and place exactly where you want the buttons. So you can have a button grid, which I had very slightly started making into that fixed kind keys. You can set out pedals, metronomes, which is kind of nifty. You can apply sine waves. And so as the sine wave goes up and down, it's going to send out different OSC packets and different OSC stuff like that. And of course, you need to be able to edit all. So I started it and then I didn't stop it. If you close it without stopping it, it's going to just continuously send out OSC. But it's a fun app. And they have a bunch of different options in here that you can apply and actually start working with yourself. So one that I found kind of nifty was the pedals. And before I go back to Hog, I wanted to kind of show what the pedals were. So you have these, when you add in a pedal, it adds in 5 pedals by default for you. So 1 through 5, and then this press all button. When you hit the press all, it pushes them all down at once. And you can also see what OSC is being sent out here. You can, whenever you want to customize inside the OSC widgets, you can right click on it and you hit edit, and it's going to give you the option to edit that specific, whatever you right clicked on. The label is just this number 1 here, or whatever you want it to be called. MW. There we go, MW example. Cool, and now we can see it's there. Your OSC output is the command that you actually want it to trigger. So like I have, so if you wanted it to specifically go and trigger a fader, you should say /hog/hardware/fader, and then / whatever number you wanted the fader to be. I'll just do 10. I have this one set up specifically, and we'll see why it's cool. And then your min and your max values go here. So a fader goes from 0 to 255 value. So from 0, and then you would change that to 255. And then what this is how fast does it, so the min here is how fast does it take for the pedal to go down? Like if you were pushing a foot pedal, how fast does it take to go down? And then if you release the foot pedal, how quickly are you releasing that pedal? So that's what that option is there.
Is that like in milliseconds or?
It is in milliseconds.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's in milliseconds, so that's 250 milliseconds down, so pretty instant, and then 1000 milliseconds up, so a 1 second up. And then it also tells, some of them have notes over here, which is pretty nifty, and that's how I knew it was in milliseconds, that you can send out at the same time. I'm going to switch real quick to computer and Hog so we can see this again. And I hope it's going to send out correctly. Well, it does.
We can't see your front panel.
Oh. You can't.
Kind of blocks each other.
1 second.
Open up a virtual wing.
Ah.
That might work.
Yeah. I see what you're
Just
saying.
happen to have both applications focused on the same spot.
Play back. There we go.
There you go.
So now you can see, so I'm going to have this pedal over here in the widgets actually control fader 2. So basically all of these pedals here are different fade times I have on that fader basically. So 0, 0 is instant on, instant off. And then you could have like 3 seconds up, 3 seconds down. So as I hold it down, it's going to take 3 seconds to send out that from 0 to 255 value. And then when I bring it down, it's going to take 3 seconds to come down. Now where I think this gets kind of cool is you can actually interrupt what's going on. So if I wanted it to be like jaggy going up, I can hold down, bring it back down, hold it up, and it's just going to go up and down, up and down. Again, it's like a foot pedal. So it's like gas in your car, I guess I should say more so. So as you push it down, you're going to be releasing more, and you can always interrupt that coming back up and down. And like I said, you can customize them. So this is 3 seconds up, and then whenever I let go, it's going to be 6 seconds going out. And it'll eventually go out when it gets the chance. It gets really... This app specifically gets really customizable. You can also, they have like a metronome feature. So if I hit go here on this metronome, every time it ticks, it's going to make the fader go to 255. Every time it talks, it goes to 0. So I basically have a flash key perfectly to a beat here. And again, OSC is really all about like remote triggering a bit. So if you need, especially when it comes to Hog, either remote triggering or remote controlling the console. So if you needed to send a trigger and say, hey, every time this goes, I need it to be to this specific beat, then you could do like a metronome type thing with this. And then you can always pause it and it's going to stop. That is the OSC widgets, which I think is really fun and a really cool app that is completely free to use and to work with. If you end up making a widget dashboard, I should say, I guess. I don't really know the best thing to call this. But you make a bunch of widgets and you need to save your widgets. Then you can always hit file and then save, and you can save your widgets. You can also so you can also share widgets if you need to. They're just stored in like standard text documents. So you can share them. I know Luke Delwich over at ETC started making one that was pretty cool that did the faders and then the keypad and the fixed kind keys on the console. So that's a good start also. And if you're trying to make your own custom stuff and you don't know what all the faders do, like you don't know all the commands, we have them all listed in the manual. If you you can actually just type in Hog4 OSC mappings on Google and it comes in. There are some that are not in the manual. So if you're missing some that are in the manual, you can also download the Touch OSC editor, and that's for Mac or PC. And then open the layouts in the editor, and you'll be able to see what those commands are as well. And that's actually a pretty useful tool if you're getting something just slightly off. It'll be helpful to see how the editor is doing it, since we made that one.
It's better to deconstruct it first if you don't know kind of how it all works.
I completely agree. You can learn a lot from that also, and see like how you can daisy chain things if you need to, stuff like that. Another app that I use quite often to send OSC is QLab. If you haven't heard of QLab, it is a Mac only app. It is very useful. It was originally, I believe, like a sound app, if I remember correctly. Like V1 was sound, where you basically drag and drop your stuff into it. I'm going to focus on the computer again. So you drag and drop your cues. So these are the different types of cues you can have in here. If you had a sound cue, you just drag and drop it in, give it a target, meaning what you want, that kind of what sound file you want it to fire, that kind of thing. We use QLab a lot in the demo room in Austin. It is basically what controls our demo room. So you hit a command key on the console, it sends out to QLab, hey, we're going to go this specific queue in QLab. QLab then sends back the time code to come back in. We don't send out via OSC though, we send out via MIDI, but you can send out OSC in here. So like I can have one in here that's go list 10. This little network icon, that gives you a network queue. So like I said, OSC is a network-based protocol, so you drag that guy in. Underneath settings is where you actually go and you type in that command or that path, whatever whatever app or whatever you're using to say calls it. And then you have your destination here, so where are you actually going to send it, that kind of stuff. Now in QLab, you can have different destinations, which is the nifty part here. So underneath the settings, you can go into network, and you can add in new patches. So if I had an EOS on the line, I could type in EOS, say what network I wanted to send it on. So if you have 2 network cards in the computer, you can actually toggle that also. So one could go to Thunderbolt, one could go to the Wi-Fi. You would type in the IP address then if you needed to as well, for the destination. So this would be the Hog's IP address or the EOS console IP address. So if I needed to split them off into 2 different networks, for example. And then this is the port number here, so that'd be the input port on the console. And then you can say done here once you have them all put in, and then you can change what your destination is. So you could have a group queue in QLab that says go list 10 for Hog, and then go queue 20 for EOS, and you can trigger them both at the same time at that point. This is how I generally trigger my shows. I usually use QLab for like projection stuff, and then Hog is dealing with all the lighting stuff. So if I need any synchronized cues, everything is centered around QLab. Then at that point, and we go on the specific QLab queue. And then what's nifty about QLab, like I said, it can take in it can take in like MIDI notes. It can spit out MIDI notes. It can spit out time code. It has a lot of nifty things like that to be able to send in and out different protocols if needed.
And if you're on Windows, you can use a program called Reaper, which is essentially very, very similar, but it also sends out timecode, MIDI notes, and OSC, and it's all compatible with Hog. So if you're like me that I don't use any sort of Apple products, I use Reaper.
Does it do a list like this? I've never used Reaper. I've never needed to.
I'm not so. The Reaper is a huge program that I don't really. I use it enough to do time code, and MIDI notes is about as much as I use it for. But that's just me personally. I'm sure there might be some sort of a queuing version of it, but they work timeline based. At least that's how I work in Reaper.
Yeah, I've heard Reaper recently as well. With Mark and everyone as a time code, like you were saying, or MIDI notes at specific queues. And because then you can export a queue list from Reaper into Hog, so you can have your time code already like laid out for you. And then I've also heard it as like for audio editing purposes.
Right.
Again, I don't use it, but that's what I've heard it as. So I was just curious.
I use it pretty much just for time code, and I've used it for MIDI notes, but I don't think I've actually personally used it for OSC, but I know it does support OSC commands. Oh,
that's cool. Anything that supports OSC is a good thing in my book, just because of how open OSC is itself, and it allows for a lot of customizability at that point too. I think Peter's asking, can I use OSC to trigger things in QLab from a queue in my show on the Roadhog? So you want the Roadhog to trigger QLab? Is that what I'm understanding? I just want to be clear about this. Yes. So Hog does not support custom OSC out, which I think is going to be where you run into this issue. I haven't played with QLab enough. I know you can send QLab messages, but does QLab OSC controls? Let's see. You might be able to get away with it a little bit if you have a specific command sent out on the list. So, what's kind of cool in Hog, I'll switch real quick so we can actually see inside Hog itself. In Hog, and where we're getting a little bit to, is you can, on a queue list, assign your comment macro. I don't know if this will work. I've never tried this. I'm assuming it can, since you can capture a custom command here. Where is it? There used to be a out for a chat.
What are you looking for?
You used to be able to send out a chat message in OSC, like from a comment macro. But I don't know if that's a thing anymore. Maybe it's no, that's a MIDI.
You can send a MIDI note.
Yeah, you can send a MIDI note, but not via OSC. So you can't send OSC out from the console. So you can't send a custom. Because I think you would then, because I know in the mappings that you sent, there isn't a way to get a chat string, but I think you would have to send that chat literally every time you wanted it to trigger. So there's not really a OSC way to get out of Hog into QLab. What I would do, Peter, and how I've always done it at this point, is I do OSC to Hog. I mean, I do QLab to Hog. That is the way that I traditionally go, just because Hog can't send out. Hog is very rigid on what it can send out. So like command line, it can send out any kind of feedback it sends out, but you can't send out custom OSC messages. So at that point, I would say, if you need anything to be synced between QLab and Hog, either you're going to want to hook up MIDI and do MIDI notes between the two, or you're going to want to hook up, or you're going to want to go and do QLab as the center of it and send out the MIDI notes that way. Yeah, Kevin, you're right. You can only send out MIDI notes on command, but Hog will send out the chat string messages. But I was almost positive. I thought that was the comment macro that we had. but I'm probably wrong. But yeah, so MIDI notes is your best friend in that case, or you could do so either way, MIDI is going to be involved, but if you really wanted to do OSC, you could use an intermediary, a software in the middle, instead of trying to be fancy with words. You could use software in the middle though, also, and do like Touch Designer will take MIDI in and then spit out OSC if you need to, and then you could trigger technically QLab with that OSC trigger from Touch Designer. But at that point, my question is, why not just use MIDI to go into QLab unless it's on a different computer? Well, with that being said about QLab, I was actually going to mention Touch Designer as well in here as something. So another app that people like to use on the desktop is Touch Designer because it can take basically any protocol in and then spit out a different protocol if you need to. And you can customize it and have it be however you want to. So you could actually even set so you could say, great, this device over here is sending out a UDP address, let's say a UDP packet. Well, I need that to be OSC to come into Hog. Well, you could put a computer with Touch Designer in it in the middle and take that UDP packet and turn it into this specific OSC message if you needed to. Touch Designer is quite the heavy quite a heavy application, and that's going to take a bit of a learning curve, but it's super duper useful whenever you want to start getting really, really custom on how things work. Touch Designer is really powerful in like trying to map things. So like if you're doing any kind of like LED mapping to specific like LEDs, or if you're doing LED mapping, video mapping, and you basically want to send all of that through and then trigger certain things at different times, the OSC or MIDI, Touch Designer is the way to go. The guy with the cube, Deadmau5. Deadmau5 does all his stuff via OSC and Touch Designer, where he will like all his cube is ran through Touch Designer, and he sends in a specific OSC signal, and that'll like adjust as he goes, and as that OSC it like live does it, which is kind of nifty. But Touch Designer gets really powerful. It's a really powerful tool that I think is worth checking out if you need to. But and like I said, it's really good if you're trying to get one signal and then send out a different type of signal as well. The last one I want to talk about desktop apps. It's not really a desktop app, so to say. It's more like an app that needs to run for another accessory. So if you have like a Stream Deck, or you have the Stream Deck app, there's this app called the Companion app that you run on a computer, whether it's Windows, Mac, or Linux. You run it on a computer. And it will take in the Stream Deck button pushes and send out OSC. So sometimes there's a lot of designers that now just run around with this like 16 button little device. And then you can actually just customize those buttons to do whatever you want. Again, it's all about show control and being able to make your workflow faster. So you could say, great, I want this keyboard shortcut. And then when you hit that button, it does that keyboard shortcut. So you can open different views, you can open different windows, that kind of stuff with the app. So the Companion app isn't made by Stream Deck, it's made by someone else, but it's still pretty nifty. There's some built-in templates already inside Companion app that do work with Hog specifically. And it's just and it's a fun little device to start working with. And that can also be used in other ways with OSC and without OSC as well. Cool. And before I leave apps, does anyone else have any questions about kind of like the stuff that I talked about? I think we're caught up on questions, but I just want to make sure like people are asking questions, or if I need to repeat something because I talked really fast at the beginning, like I'm more than happy to.
Did you want to talk about like troubleshooting at all, or just some kind of best practices and things like that?
Yeah, we definitely can. So, yeah, we can we can go into that.
So one thing that
Yeah.
always gets me, and I always forget, is that a lot of times devices, whether it be a computer or a phone or a tablet, if it's connected to a router or a network and there's no internet access, it'll switch over to like cellular data, or it'll switch over to another
Mhm.
network that's close by. So like if you're on your home or work network and you're trying to set up OSC, or you're trying to connect to your console, and there's no internet on that sort of local network, your phone will sort of dip out. So a lot of times you have to go into your settings on that device and say, continue to keep this connection if there's no internet access. You also want to set up like a static IP address. So a lot of times when you connect to a router, the router just spits out a random IP address within its range for your device. You want it to be static, so it always has the same IP address. That way, every time that you log in or go away from the router, you come back to the router, you don't have to keep updating your IP settings. Also, you sometimes usually have to disable your firewalls if you're on PC, or if you allow that app through your firewall.
Mhm.
I usually just turn them off.
Yeah. I mean, if you're running Hawk 4 PC, we recommend you running with your firewall turned off anyway. So make sure your firewall is turned off. Static IPs are a great way to go, just to make sure you're not like conflicting with anything. It gives you a more stable line as to this is where you're talking to. I echo everything that Noah just said. Honestly, my suggestion is if you're dealing with a phone or an iPad, I've started because I am lazy. I've started buying the iPads that have the cellular connection, and I don't like hotspotting anymore. Just if you're trying to do anything with OSC, turn off that cellular connection. That way, it doesn't default back. Like usually in your devices, you can go and turn off specifically like cellular connection. Go and turn that off while you're doing OSC. Just because it, like Noah said, it's going to try to, those devices are made to be connected to the internet. So it tries to do whatever it can to connect to the internet itself. And always make sure that local, and you always, just like with every other networking, make sure you're in the right IP scheme. If you're not in the right IP scheme, it's not going to work.
I've also noticed that like some IP or some routers have a limited IP range, and so you need to make sure that both the console and the device that you're controlling with Hog are in that acceptable IP range of the router. And you should be able to log into your router and change those settings, but I just know that some routers are very picky on what range you can actually have an IP in.
Mm-hmm. They are. Um, it's also why I really like the routers, like I have the Google Wi-Fi system here, like the mesh network that is all like app controlled. So as long as my phone is on the same network or like my iPad's on the same network, I can go in and instantly and it really easily like change what my IP addresses are, change like
Right.
all that kind of stuff. Like those can cause headaches, but it's also really easy to change the network settings at that point. The only reason they can cause headaches is because stuff like Noah just said is usually turned on by default. So you just got to be able to go and turn that stuff off. Um, I like recommended routers. I would say it really is all going to be dependent on your network at the end of the day. Um, I've used the $45 router from Walmart and it's been fine. I've used a $100 router from Best Buy that's like got all the antennas and it's still like I got 60 feet out. I mean, not 60 feet, but it was up in the booth and I went down to the stage and it wasn't the best because there's just a lot of interference at the end of the day. So, I
Yeah.
mean, if you can get away with a $45 router, go for it. I like to keep one just in my bag. It's actually it lives in my suitcase. That way, if I ever need it, it's always there. I can just run and grab it. But it is a good investment to keep your own router because you never know when it would be useful to be able to wirelessly control something.
And you want to kind of center your router where you're going to be using
Mm-hmm.
OSC. So if you're using OSC as an RFU or remote focus unit, um, you want your router to be as close to the stage as possible so you have the best connection. If you set up your router in front of house and it's 200 feet from where you're going to actually be using your device, you could
Mm-hmm.
technically be able to do it, but it's best to have that router or have multiple routers that you can work with.
Yeah. Which is also why I like the mesh system, because then if we are on that 200 foot whatever, I can go buy another putt put it and get it in there if I need to. Again, it all comes down to budget, what you like to carry, what you like to work with. I mean, that's usually what it comes down to at the end of the day is what you like and what you found has worked. Because everyone's network situation is different. Networking is great because it's super fast and it's super easy and you get all these wonderful protocols that can happen. But then at the end of the day, network is a pain in the butt if just one setting is off by one number.
I don't know what that's like at all. Never been there.
Yeah. So I part of the title was like, and should you be using OSC? Well, it depends. Just like with any other show control, I'm going to take out the cop out answer here and say it honestly just depends on what your show actually needs. If you need, usually no matter what, a remote focus unit is super nifty and super nice to have just in your back pocket to be able to be like, cool, let's do a fixture check real quick and let's next through and figure out what these fixtures do. So in that case, like OSC is really nice just because, a laptop, it doesn't fit in your back pocket, but a phone does, or your iPod Touch, or iPad Mini, or like whatever, like that stuff fits in pockets. I don't know any Android devices, so again, I'm sorry to all those Android people. But Android phones fit in your pocket, or at least they should. Most of them do. There's also a nifty Apple Watch app that I forgot the name of it, but I think it has Focus in the name that you can actually talk to it, and then it'll send the OSC commands out from your phone command. From like it has the tether between your watch and your phone. You talk to it, it sends, and then the phone will send the OSC command to the console. It works for EOS and Hog for sure because I've tested it out just a little bit here and there. Definitely, it is magic, but it's definitely nothing I would like control my show on. Like I feel confident enough that I could, if needed, I could run a show off like Touch OSC or like iHog or like one of the other apps that are for phones and stuff. I do not feel confident running my show off a watch.
But you can be like Star Trekky and talk into it.
Fixture 1 at 5. Go.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's just saying like the console specific language. So it'd be like 5 at full enter, and it would do that kind of thing. But again, so it's all going to depend on your show. If you need to talk between devices that are not lighting centered or were not made specifically for lighting, but they support OSC, then obviously OSC is going to be the way to go. There's I think it's Meow Wolf actually does a lot to do, actually has a lot, and it will, so Meow Wolf is a big lighting install, and they do a bunch of like custom stuff, like you see a bunch of like twinkly lights, stuff like that. All of that is usually sent back into OSC, like so that they could actually like OSC back out into like Touch Designer to trigger something else, or they use OSC as a trigger to go and trigger like their custom like Arduino and stuff like that. So it does get pretty useful. So I like to think of OSC as like the bridge type network to talk to different devices on, to talk to different control centers. So like if you needed sound, projection, and lighting all to be controlled together, usually OSC is going to be one of the ways to go. And with that being said, that is all the information I have about OSC. It's a great magical protocol, and I'm excited to see where it all goes. Bye, Kevin. Thanks for joining us. I hope that this was all great, useful info. And
of course, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and if anyone ever has any questions, like outside of live time, you can put them on the YouTube channel. You can email us, all that good stuff. We're always here.
Yep. Support@highend.com.
Yep.
Cool.
Thank
you, everybody.
Thanks everyone. I'm gonna open up for general Q&A and see if anyone wants to chat with us. Is there anything you want to add also?
No.
Okay.
I think that was a pretty good overview. OSC is great, especially if you have the time for it and you can implement it. And then once again, it's really fantastic when you have non-lighting people and you give them a nice iPad and you go, here you go, and they can't screw it up.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of my big thing for it, and then just being able to control from stage.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
So,
And I
I
really
don't
like
see any questions.
Yeah, I don't see any coming in. We can wait for about 5 minutes, I think, if
Yeah.
nothing comes in. And it doesn't have to
Um,
pertain to OSC at this point. It can, or show control. I mean, if you have general show control questions, I love show control. I love the idea of being able to take something that is not hog related and either control it with hog or use hog to control it. Or, I mean, or use it to control hog. Like, that is just like something I like putting those pieces together, which is why I was like, oh my goodness, OSC widgets. Like, it's great. Thanks, Peter. And we'll see you next week. Appreciate you
um,
coming in.
Next week, same time, we are having, it's going to be 10 tips and tricks to be a better, faster, more efficient programmer or something along those lines. So we're going to come up with, where we've already come up with 10 things that you probably didn't know about the console, or little tricks that you didn't know, shortcuts that you can do to be better and faster, or just little things that at least me and Megan in our training classes, we noticed that people don't quite pick up on as quickly. So we're going to kind of highlight those big things that people kind of miss out on or that they should know about. I call them the things that I wish I knew before I started working at high end.
Yeah, they're gonna be really useful, and I think we might have gone over them in other videos, but it's still good, as has been the MO, it's still good to have them all in one video if you don't have the time to go and cipher through,
Yep.
what,
Until you learn something.
8.5 hours of programming. But yeah, again, thanks everyone for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Well, we all really appreciate it, actually. I know it was kind of like an information dump and more of like, here's a walkthrough of all these different things, but I think it's useful to know what's out there and what can be done. I think out of my favorite apps, I thoroughly enjoy the OSC Widgets app.
I like Touch OSC, but that's because of, well, I'm not on Apple.
That's fair. I mean, I think I even like OSC Widgets more than my app.
I like your app.
It was fun.
In the times that I'm get to play with it.
Yeah, that's fair. Because Apple. Iris, you're a PC user. That all of these apps that I showed besides QLab actually work with Windows as well. So OSC Widgets also works on Windows. And it's really nifty. I would highly suggest like going to look at it again. It's just and you can rearrange those windows wherever you want them, and you can even make them a little bit more transparent if you need to. Also, it's a nifty app. I'm gonna stop. So again, thanks everyone. I really appreciate you guys tuning in.
Cool. Thank you, everybody.